The Cold War was a period of political tension and military rivalry between the United States and its allies, primarily Western democracies, and the Soviet Union and its allies, primarily communist states, lasting roughly from the end of World War II in 1945 to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In 1945, the end of World War II saw the Yalta and Potsdam conferences set the stage for the post-war order, with the Allies dividing Germany into 4 occupation zones. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine was announced, marking the US's commitment to containing communism, and the Marshall Plan was initiated, providing US economic aid to rebuild Western Europe. The Berlin blockade and airlift occurred in 1948, where the Soviet Union blocked access to West Berlin, and the US responded by airlifting supplies to the city. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed as a military alliance among the US, Canada, and Western European nations. During the 1950s, the Korean War took place from 1950 to 1953, a proxy war where the US and United Nations forces supported South Korea, while the Soviet Union and China supported North Korea. In 1955, the Soviet Union established the Warsaw Pact in response to NATO, solidifying military alliances among Eastern Bloc countries. The space race began in 1957 when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. In 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution in Cuba led to the rise of a communist government in the Western Hemisphere. The 1960s saw the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, physically dividing East and West Berlin. The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred in 1962, bringing the US and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war after the Soviets placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. In 1963, a partial nuclear test ban treaty was signed by the US, Soviet Union, and the UK, marking the beginning of arms control efforts. The Vietnam War took place from 1964 to 1975, with the US supporting South Vietnam against the communist North Vietnam, backed by the Soviet Union and China. In the 1970s, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT-I, in 1972 led to the signing of a treaty to limit nuclear weapons. The US withdrew from the Vietnam War in 1973 after a peace agreement was signed, leading to the fall of Saigon in 1975. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, beginning a decade-long conflict with US-backed Afghan rebels, the Mujahideen. The 1980s marked the final stages of the Cold War. In 1980, the US boycotted the Moscow Summer Olympics in protest of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. In 1983, US President Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a missile defense system to protect against Soviet missile threats. Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union in 1985 and introduced reforms like Glasnost and Perestroika. In 1987, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty was signed by the US and the Soviet Union, eliminating an entire class of nuclear missiles. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, symbolizing the collapse of communist control in Eastern Europe. Finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved on December 26, marking the definitive end of the Cold War. The Cold War influenced global politics for nearly half a century and shaped the foreign policies of many countries during this time.